Hi, I'm Greg Barron from Rideable Bicycle Replicas in Alameda, California. And today I'm going to show you how to install solid rubber tire on Highwheel wheels. In this case, we're going to use our small benchtop mounted machines for our smaller wheels because the benchtop machines are a little more appropriate for mounting solid rubber tire than my large wheel machine, which is actually a somewhat simpler machine, but this works great for the small stuff. The benchtop machine has been around for a long time, since the 1870s. This particular one I've got right here was built in the 60s or 70s in the US. The problem is, solid rubber tires kind of went the way of the buggy whip, and with the end of the high wheel bikes and then with the end of wheelchairs with solid rubber tires, there's not a lot of people left that can install tires. That's one of the reasons I'm doing the video. As far as the machines go, as I said, this is a somewhat modern machine. This machine here is an actual antique that I picked up. So if you happen to need to install tires and you see one of these at the flea market, you should probably get it. These days they run somewhere between $250 and $500. Hopefully you can get them with all the tooling that you need as well. But this machine would almost work as it is. It's just missing one part. So, and then if you really need to, I actually can supply a brand new machine for you as well. And this one comes with all the tooling that you would need to install tires. It's big, it's heavy, and it works pretty well. For these intents and purposes though, I'm going to use my machine that we use in the shop all the time and show you how this is done. Okay, so to install the solid rubber tire for the smaller wheels, it's a very similar process to installing it on the front wheels, on the big wheels. You need to lubricate your tire and wire, and I use WD-40 for the internal lubricant, and I flood the inside of the tire because, as I expressed for the big wheels, you really need to have free motion on your material when you install it, otherwise you have problems. Now, on this machine, this is a draw machine, and the way it works is you secure your wires into the pull points like this. And as you see, I've crossed my wires. The reason for that is so that they actually pull apart rather than just spread the gap in the tire. So right now it's set up on the machine. It's ready to draw, except I need to put this spacer block in place. The spacer block is a dedicated tool that you need for any machine like this because it, like my other spacer block, keeps the tire from coming together once you start drawing it. If you didn't have something like that, you would never be able to draw the wire and compress the tire down onto the rim. Okay, so this is set up to work right now. Your next step is, again, as with your large wheels, lubricate the rim because you need the material to move freely on the wheel. And again, I use a fairly common silicone-based tire gel. It's a tire shine gel that is a very good product for making things go slip and slide across each other. Now, you set your wheel in place there, and our tire is in position. The machine is set up. It's set to draw. So now you start cranking. Now the machine again has left and right threads, and it causes these blocks here to move outward, and it draws the wire through the rubber, and it causes the rubber to compress down onto the rim. And remember, that tire was in length longer than the circumference of the wheel. And on small wheels, generally you're looking at about 4 fingers worth of overlap, whereas on the big wheels you're looking at close to a foot. Once you get the proper tension on it, it's ready to put the joint in it. So again, if it's too loose, your rubber is going to be loose on the rim. If it's too tight, you can potentially pop the joint, which is a bad thing. You'd have to start all over again. Like the big wheels, you need to have excess rubber. So the length of your tire is actually longer than the circumference of the wheel. You need the excess rubber to have that spring back function of the tire. If your tire was just as long as the rim, eventually you would get a gap in the wheel, and that would be bad. So what you do now is, once you've taken put all your compression on there and sucked the tire down, same thing with the outside. You spin the wheel and you put a joint in your wire. Now, if you do it right, the joint in your wire will be just the perfect tension. If it's too tight, the wire can actually cut itself just as it bends and stretches, and it causes it to break. So a wire that is too tight is a bad thing. A wire that is too loose is a bad thing. You're looking for that happy medium, and that's unfortunately more of an art than a science, but it is what it is. So at this point, we are ready to finish the joint. So what I'll do is I'll back off my tension just a little bit so that I can work with it. And I'll take my cutters and my needle nose pliers, and I prefer to use short needle nose pliers. They give me good positive control on the wire. I'll grab my wire there and get my cutter in place, and I'll clip it loose. Now again, if this was too tight, this joint would just bend itself back open. So you want to crimp it down, and then you want to cut your other side the same way, and you've got to cut it at just the right length so that you can still close your joint, because if your wire's too long, it won't close. So what I've got here is a nice tight joint. Crimp the joint down. Now it's ready for the spacer block to come out. So release the spacer block, give it a little tug, and if you're all right, the tire will start to come together almost of its own accord. Now, a couple different ways to close this joint if you really want to. You can just strike it crossways on the concrete like that, and eventually it'll close up. Or if your machine has the clamps like I have here, then you can lock it into the clamps and use the clamps to draw the tire gap back together again. So there's that, and I'll hold this, and we'll see the gap just go away, because this is taking that tire that, remember, is already longer than the rim and assisting it to spring back into position. And sometimes it might take a couple of different, there you go, and that gets you your joint. And this one here's not springing back exactly perfect, so hang on a second. So one of the ways to close up the gap in the tire, if you don't have the clamp tools for your machine, is to actually cross strike it across the concrete. Just a lateral strike like this, slowly rotate it, will cause the rubber to move. So you do that in a couple of different directions to get your tire, which has been nicely lubricated, to move around the wheel. And it starts to close up that gap more and more. And as this tire rolls, you can see there's a slight gap there. Part of that has to do with the angle of the rubber as it meets up with itself too. If the angles aren't cut perfectly square and you get a little bit of angle, it'll show in here. Once this tire starts rolling, it'll equalize itself around and it will close up the rest of the way. So this one will work just fine. All done.